Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk to you about the Alpha Disc build that is currently out. I got Alpha recently and had the wonderful chance to play around with it in not only a dungeon setting but also a raid setting, and I want to talk a little bit about how I feel the new Legion disc is since it got a ridiculously large overhaul for Legion. So, as everyone probably knows, it's more damage oriented, less targeted healing, but that doesn't mean we don't target our raid. So the first part about that's important is applying atonement, and at first I was really excited about applying atonement, and I wasn't quite sure how good it would be or how fun it would be, but it actually is pretty fun, which is to my liking. And the main way you're going to be applying atonement is through two spells. One is Power Word Shield and one is Plea. Power Word Shield, as everyone knows, has a 6 second cooldown now, and you're just going to be hitting it on cooldown. You're mostly going to be hitting on tanks and debuff targets. So we're going to be applying atonement through that, and we're going to be like filling in Plea to hit people because it's very instant, it's very cheap, it's very efficient, and it's great for spreading without losing all of your mana. I think that because atonement requires a little bit of preemptive work, sometimes starting out a dungeon or something feels a little bit shaky because your tank is going to go right in there and you haven't applied any atonements. Yeah, you're just putting up Powered Shield. And now you're looking for mobs to attack and you're like, oh god, so many things are happening. So I can kind of see why some people are like, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't feel like I'm healing, I feel like I'm just damaging things. But it's actually not that bad. Because you just have to take it one step at a time, right? And the first step is just applying the Powered Shield, applying the Plea, the Atonement to the people who need it, and then just hitting it with that Penance, with that Shadow Word Pain, with that Purge. And maybe even that Solace if you take that. But overall it feels like pretty good. Like there's not really in 5-man a situation where I was like, oh my god, I can't heal this unless I was out of mana. And it's because Mind Blast is so good and Penance is so good and spreading Atonement is so easy, and when you have an AoE situation, Power Word Radiance literally just does everything for you. You hit one button and boom, everyone has Atonement, and then follow that up with a Penance or a Purge and you are doing so much healing. It's really exciting. And you even have choices, like you get to choose to smite or mind blast, and mind blast is super good because it does more damage than smite, it does more healing than smite, and it reduces the damage that the target is going to do on its next attack. It's ridiculous. And at first I thought that mind blast was so good, like there has to be a downside, and I was like, oh, mana, like it costs more mana than smite. But what I quickly found on alpha is that smite doesn't really need to be cast because you never run out of mana, and that's what I first thought. But it turns out that there's a bug where Shield Discipline is always on. That's your mana talent, where Powered Shield refunds mana when it's absorbed. So even when you're running Solace and Mindbender, you also have Shield Discipline. And so for a lot of people, that's probably why you feel like you have infinite mana, because you have 2 mana talents. So I did some testing and ran some dungeons, as you're probably looking at, and I tried running Mindbender a little bit, and then I tried to switch it up and go just straight Shield Discipline so I could get a better feel for what mana would be like. And my playstyle didn't agree with that because I cast so many Mind Blasts that I would find myself halfway through the dungeon going, oh my goodness, I need mana. And I think that part of that is because without timers and learning new dungeons, you don't know when AoE is coming, so being able to abuse Rapture to get mana back is not really that viable until you know when things are going to be coming. but without that, like, it's a little shaky. Like, you can't be spamming Mind Blast all the time. So I was really down about Smite. I was like, Smite is so useless and bad and pointless, but when I was running just Shield Discipline, I was finding myself casting more Smites, running in between pulls, making sure I was trying to conserve mana because there were some bosses I was getting to, and that pug tank's not going to wait for mana, and you're like, oh, I need to hit Smite a little bit. And it all works out. The other interesting part about Smite versus Mind Blast is that your weapon has 2 buffs that it gives you. Well, one is a buff and one is just like a heal that happens. So when you cast holy spells, there's a chance that anybody with your atonement will get a heal on them. Just like a wave of light will shoot out and hit atonement targets, and that's really cool. And so like holy spells are going to be like penance and plea and purge of the wicked and of course smite. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have shadow spells are going to give you a damage buff, and the damage buff is super good. Let's see, the shadow buff increases your direct damage that you deal every second for 10 seconds by 3%. That's super good. Lots of healing, lots of damage, that's good stuff. But your shadow spells are really limited, so it's like Mind Blast and Shadow Word Pain is really all you have. Well, for is it even shadow spells, I wonder? Yeah, it's shadow spells in general, so that means Shadow Covenant, and that means Shadow Mend. Like, all of that stuff is going to give you that damage buff, and that's really good. And then, of course, Shadow Word Pain. And I think it's on cast, so that means that Shadow Word Pain, like spamming it on multiple people, I don't know if the ticks will generate that buff or if it's just the cast, and that's something I still need to figure out. But going into Shadow Word Pain, I'd like to talk about Shadow Word Pain versus Purge of the Wicked, because that's a really interesting choice. Alright, so Purge the Wicked versus Shadow Word Pain. I really like Purge of the Wicked right now. It's super strong. It's a lot stronger than Shadow Word Pain is on single target, and even on multi-target if you can spread it right with penance. But that's not to say I completely dislike Shadow Word Pain, because Shadow Word Pain casts are going to help get you that shadow buff from your weapon that I was talking about earlier. Not only that, but when you have a lot of AoE targets, you can't really get Purge of the Wicked on all of them very quickly. Pretty much you have to put Purge up, spread it immediately, so you have to hold your penance for a Purge, and then you have to use your cooldown purges on different targets while continuing to penance targets that already have purge on to make sure you're spreading that as efficiently as possible. But with Shadow Word Pain, you can literally tap target and dot everything. So there are like different situations where like both, like if there's a lot of targets, I much prefer Shadow Word Pain, and I'll usually talent into Grace because of that. I don't particularly like Grace, but it's either Grace or Shadow Covenant. And even though I like Shadow Covenant, there's not enough applicable uses for it in 5-mans for you to ever really use it. So, go-to is really Grace if I want Shadow Word Pain, and if I don't want Shadow Word Pain, Purge of the Wicked. Besides that, there's mana back talents that I'd really like to talk about, and I already talked about how Shield Discipline is on all the time. But in a world where Shield Discipline isn't on all the time, I'm really liking Mindbender, and I've been logging a couple things. I logged the Ursock raid and I logged some dungeons, and looking at the resources, Mindbender is giving a lot of mana back. And Mindbender paired with something like Power Infusion or the Troll Berserking Racial is super good, and it's going to get you a lot of mana back and do a lot of damage. And on average, I'm seeing Mindbender out mana Shield Discipline most of the time, but that's without having the trait on the weapon that puts a powered shield on yourself when you powered shield someone else. So I'm not getting the maximum amount of mana I could from powered shielding people. But I'm also not using Rapture very efficiently right now because I don't know when AoE damage is happening, and so that's something that'll make Shield Discipline even better as we get like big wigs and DBM and stuff like that working, and just learning damage patterns from some of these dungeons that we've only run like 2 or 3 times right now. Other than that, Solace is interesting. Solace is technically a healing increase over something like Mind Blast even. But the mana is not very good. Like, when you compare Mindbender mana to Shield Discipline mana to Solace mana, Solace is usually the lowest in terms of a mana return. However, it is that it's like you're constantly getting mana back as you spend spells, and you're constantly spending globals getting mana back. And that's where Solace really shines, is that even though raw mana isn't always there, you're actually spending less mana because you're casting Solace so often. And then Mindbender, you're spending more globals casting spells, so you're spending more mana and then you're getting a burst of mana back. And then you've got Shield Discipline where you're not really spending any more globals getting mana. But when you hit Rapture, you get that burst, and then outside of Rapture, you don't have that burst. So it's kind of like the best of both. It's very interesting, but I'm really digging Mindbender right now. I want Shield Discipline to be the best because I love it. I just don't know the damage patterns right now for it to be the best for me right now. So hopefully that changes. I really like Contrition in the 75 talent. Having that extra 5 seconds is super nice. It means you don't have to reapply Atonement as often, which means you can spend more time casting healing spells and damage spells. I also really like Power Infusion, but I only really like Power Infusion when I'm using Mindbender, just to get that more mana back. And then while Mindbender is going, you're obviously benefiting from Power Infusion by casting more spells in general. And Power Infusion can also line up really well with Rapture, get more powered shields out. Twist of Fate, I feel like would be really, really strong if you could get the situation for it to proc from healing, but that doesn't happen very often, so I'm a little bit disappointed with that. And then we have our 90 talents. So we have Clarity of Will, Divine Star, and Halo. Right now, I feel that in 5-mans, Divine Star and Halo aren't really used very much. There's a couple pulls I can think of where you might hit Divine Star, you might cast a Halo, but you don't really need to, so I usually run Clarity of Will in dungeons. I don't really use that much either, but there are a couple bosses that hit a little bit probably too hard right now, and Clarity of Will is really nice for that. And I'm one of those people who hates Clarity of Will, and I still use it, so. But Divine Star versus Halo, I actually feel like Divine Star is really weak right now. You're spending 2 globals to get the same amount of healing that Halo will do in 1. Burst healing is oftentimes more needed than just consistent AoE heals, so Halo really outshines most of the time. Even in the Ursoc testing, Halo was excellent there, where Divine Star was not. And even in our testing, we were using a strat where almost the entire raid was stacked for a majority of the time, and Divine Star was not outdoing Halo because it just doesn't have that burst. So I don't really recommend Divine Star very much. The one upside is that you can cast it instantly while moving. And those are kind of what I like and dislike about each of the talents. I do like Shadow Covenant. I didn't really talk a lot about that, but it's super cool. It's sort of like casting Shadow Mend on, oh man, how many people is it? 5? So Shadow Mend on 5 people is pretty strong. But in terms of gameplay, I'm really digging it. It's a lot of fun. I like it a lot. The weapon on usability, Light's Wrath, is super weak right now, and it's supposed to do atonement healing and it doesn't, so that'll be fixed in a later build. And we're gonna have to see how strong that gets because it has potential to be ridiculously good. It's not worth casting at all right now, but that'll be fixed. Yeah, so the 5-man content, I feel really comfortable healing that. It's a little bit of an adjustment because you're not hitting people with spells constantly. It's more like a sort of like a dance, you're weaving in those pleas and those powered shields, and then you're trying to beeline those smites, penances, and mind blasts as hard as you can to get that healing out. and you can kind of sacrifice healing to do more damage by not doing atonement when you need to, which is super cool. And then you need to make sure you cut back a little on your damage spells to make sure you're spending time pleading and powered shielding so that your damage spells are actually doing enough healing to be worth it. So it's really cool. I'm really liking it. I'm really looking forward to this getting live and more people playing around with it. I want Twist of Fate to be better somehow. Maybe proc on damage would be really nice. And yeah, I didn't really talk about the penance silence, but castigation, that extra tick on penance, super nice in all situations ever. Schism is kind of nice. Like, I have a little bit of a beef with Schism because it only does an AoE explosion on the third tick, and there's a lot of times where you will cast penance and the third tick won't happen because the target will die, and that makes Schism severely lacking in those situations. I really wish it was on the first tick and not the third. That would be much better, but I don't see the Penitent being used like at all, ever, really. I would much rather use Shadow Mend on a tank than lose Castigation or Schism. But yeah, Discipline Priest. Look forward to it. It's actually excellent and a lot of fun to play. It's very different from other healers, which is something that is very good for a game that has, like, what do we got? 5 healing classes. And the dungeons are super fun, so that's my thoughts for now. There'll be lots of changes, iterations and stuff that come in the following alpha builds, and then when we move into beta we'll probably see even more changes. And we'll see more raid testing and see what happens. So that's about it. If there's anything different about Disc you want to let me know, just leave a comment down below and we can talk about it.